Investigations, the New York Times saying the total could be as high as $230 million, stemming from damages related to the FBI's Mar-a-Lago search and the Russia investigation. The president saying any decision on a payout would have to go across his desk. And Ralph, I'll start with you. What started all of this? There were boxes of classified documents at his home in Mar-a-Lago. He was asked to return them. He didn't. So why is he asking for compensation?
Yeah, first reporting this and saying that the total could be, as you mentioned, $230 million, and then him being asked about it at the White House yesterday. And so they deal with this idea of harassment. They deal with an idea of being a violation of rights and essentially compensation for what the Trump administration has continued to call a miscarriage of justice. These, important to note, Del, were filed in that interim between his two stints at the White House, before the 2024.
Okay, so here's something wild that just dropped. And honestly, I don't think people are fully grasping how massive this actually is. We're talking about Mike Davis. Yeah, that Mike Davis, one of Trump's most vocal, most aggressive allies, suddenly cooperating with federal investigators after an FBI raid. Like, this is the guy who's been all over social media, threatening to put people in jail, talking about how justice is coming for everyone who went after Trump. And now he's apparently singing like a canary to save his own skin. Let me paint the picture for you real quick. Mike Davis has been one of the loudest voices in Trump world for years. Conservative attorney, massive presence on social media, constantly ranting about the deep state, the DOJ conspiracies, all of it. This guy has been Trump's attack dog on legal issues, especially when it comes to the Mar-a-Lago documents case. He's been out there claiming the whole thing was a setup, a conspiracy, that Jack Smith and the DOJ were basically running a political hit job on Trump. And people ate it up, right? His followers loved it. He was the guy fighting back Dot. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Well, President Trump has said he is not looking for money when he was pressed on the report in the Oval Office just yesterday, but that they probably owe him what he called a lot of money. And while the Justice Department is not weighing in on the claims, the New York Times...
A lot of money, but I'm not looking for money. I'd give it to charity or something. I would give it to charity, any money. But look, what they did, they rigged the election because what they did was wrong. And, you know, when somebody does what's wrong, now, with the country, it's interesting because I'm the one that makes the decision, right? And, you know, that decision would have to go across my desk.
But here's where it gets crazy. According to multiple reports that just came out from Bloomberg Law, Yahoo News, and others, the FBI raided Davis. They went into his stuff, seized his communications, and apparently found some really interesting things. We're talking internal memos, messages, conversations, all linking Davis to what investigators are calling efforts to influence a newly impaneled grand jury in Florida. Yeah, the same grand jury that was supposedly going to investigate the so-called conspiracy against Trump regarding the Mar-a-Lago raid. Now, can you believe this? The guy who's been screaming about DOJ corruption and deep state conspiracies is now potentially at the center of an actual obstruction case. And not just any obstruction case. We're talking about tampering with federal legal processes. That's serious, serious stuff. The kind of stuff that can land you in prison for years. And here's the kicker. After this raid, after they found all this evidence, Davis apparently decided that loyalty to Trump wasn't worth whatever they had on him, because sources are now saying he's cooperating. He's become what they're calling a cooperative witness. He's talking to investigators. He's agreed to testify. And in exchange, partial immunity. Yeah, he's cutting a deal to save himself. Think about what that means for a second. This is a guy who has been Trump's most aggressive defender on legal issues. He's been out there calling for Jack Smith to be thrown in jail. He's been promoting this whole narrative that the Mar-a-Lago raid was illegal, that there was a conspiracy within the DOJ to take Trump down. And now he's working with the very investigators he's been attacking. The irony is just chef's kiss, but it gets even better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. This is all happening at the exact same time that Jack Smith, the special counsel who investigated Trump, has asked to testify publicly about DOJ conduct during his investigations. So you've got Davis flipping, you've got Smith wanting to talk, and you've got this whole mess around whether Trump's Justice Department is being weaponized for political revenge. It's like a perfect storm of chaos. And look, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this is just another overblown story Another nothing burger, right? Wrong. This matters. This matters a lot. Because what we're watching here is the potential unraveling of Trump's inner circle. If Davis is cooperating, if he's actually giving investigators information about efforts to interfere with federal processes, that opens up a whole can of worms about who else was involved, what Trump himself knew, and whether there's been systematic obstruction happening behind the scenes. We're less than a year away from the 2026 midterms. Trump's approval numbers have been all over the place. His administration has been dealing with constant scandals, constant investigations, constant drama, and now one of his most loyal soldiers just got raided by the FBI and decided to flip. That's not nothing. That's a crack in the foundation. And if history has taught us anything, once the cracks start showing, things can fall apart pretty quickly. So buckle up, because this story is just getting started. We're going to break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what this could mean for Trump's presidency moving forward. And trust me, it's way bigger than most people realize. All right, so let's dig into this properly, because there are layers to this story that most people aren't talking about yet. And honestly, the deeper you go, the weirder and more troubling it gets. First, who exactly is Mike Davis? If you're not super plugged into conservative legal circles, you might not know the name. But in Trump world, this guy is a big deal. He's a former chief counsel for nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He worked on getting Trump's judges confirmed, including Supreme Court justices. After that, he founded something called the Article 3 Project, which is basically a conservative legal advocacy group that fights for Trump's judicial picks and attacks what they call the weaponization of the justice system. But here's the thing. Davis isn't just some behind-the-scenes operator. This guy is loud. He's constantly on social media, doing interviews, podcasts, all of it. And his whole brand has been about being aggressive, being confrontational, being willing to say the quiet part out loud, while other Trump allies try to maintain some level of political decorum. Davis is out there saying stuff like people need to go to jail, that there needs to be accountability, that the Biden DOJ committed crimes. He's been calling for Jack Smith to be prosecuted. He's been promoting conspiracy theories about the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. So when someone like that gets raided by the FBI, yeah, people notice. And according to the reports, this wasn't some routine thing. Federal agents showed up with a warrant, seized communications like emails, texts, internal memos, and what they found apparently raised enough red flags that they're now treating this as a serious obstruction investigation. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The raid was specifically tied to Davis's communications with Justice Department officials about the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And remember, Davis has been one of the main people pushing this narrative that the Mar-a-Lago raid was illegal, that it was part of a conspiracy, that there should be investigations into the investigators. He's been working with Jason Redding Quinones, who's a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, to try to get a grand jury impaneled to investigate what Davis calls the conspiracy surrounding the raid. And guess what? They actually got a grand jury impaneled in Florida. Bloomberg Law reported on October 22nd that a federal judge impaneled a grand jury tied to possible political interference surrounding the Mar-a-Lago raid. Davis was out there celebrating this, claiming victory, saying justice is coming. He gave interviews talking about how this grand jury was going to expose the truth, how the people who went after Trump were going to face consequences. But then the FBI shows up at his door, and suddenly all those communications he had with DOJ officials, all those efforts to get this grand jury going, all of it becomes evidence in an obstruction investigation. Because here's what investigators are apparently looking at. Did Davis and others try to improperly influence the grand jury process? Did they try to tamper with federal legal proceedings? Were they coordinating with Trump appointees in the Justice Department to use the power of the government to go after political enemies? Those are serious allegations. Like really serious. We're not talking about some minor ethics violation, obstruction of justice, tampering with federal processes. That's the kind of stuff that destroyed people during Watergate. That's the kind of stuff that can bring down an entire administration if it goes high enough. And now Davis is cooperating. Think about what that means. When someone flips and agrees to be a cooperative witness, it's because they have information that investigators want, and they're willing to trade that information for leniency. So what does Davis know? Who else was involved? How high does this go? That's the question everyone should be asking right now. Because if Davis was coordinating with Trump-appointed officials at the DOJ, if there were efforts to use grand juries as political weapons, if there was systematic abuse of the justice system, then we're talking about something way bigger than just one overzealous lawyer getting in trouble. And here's another layer that makes this even more complicated. Jack Smith, the former special counsel who investigated Trump on the documents case and the January 6th stuff, he's asked to testify publicly about DOJ conduct during his investigations. Yahoo News reported on October 23rd that Smith wants to talk. He wants to go in front of Congress and discuss what happened during his time as special counsel. Now, why would he want to do that? Well, probably because he's seen what's been happening since Trump took office again. He's seen Trump appointees at the DOJ going after the people who investigated Trump. He's seen efforts to rewrite the narrative, to claim that the investigations were illegitimate, that they were political hit jobs, and Smith apparently wants to set the record straight. But can you imagine the fireworks if Jack Smith actually testifies publicly? The guy who indicted Trump, who brought federal charges against a former president, sitting in front of Congress under oath talking about DOJ conduct and political interference, that would be appointment television. And it would give Democrats a massive platform to hammer Trump on abuse of power right before the midterms. So you've got Davis flipping, you've got Smith wanting to testify, and you've got this broader pattern of Trump using the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. House Democrats just launched an investigation into a $230 million payment from the DOJ to Trump. Yeah, you heard that right. Trump is claiming he's owed money because of the federal investigations into him, and his DOJ is apparently trying to make that happen. CNN reported on that on October 23rd. It's all connected, right? Davis was part of this effort to flip the script, to turn the tables, to make the investigators into the investigated. He was working with Trump appointees to use the grand jury system to go after Jack Smith, the FBI agents who conducted the Mar-a-Lago raid, maybe even DOJ officials from the Biden administration. But somewhere along the line, he crossed the line. He went from being a political attack dog to potentially committing actual crimes. And now that he's been caught, now that the FBI has evidence, he's decided his own freedom is more important than loyalty to Trump. Can you blame him? I mean, we've seen this movie before. Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, Rick Gates, all these guys who were ride or die for Trump until they weren't. Until the reality of prison time became real, and they decided to save themselves. The difference this time is the context. Trump is president again. He's got control of the Justice Department. He's got loyalists throughout the federal government. And yet, the FBI is still raiding his allies. Grand juries are still being convened. Investigations are still happening. That tells you that there are still people in the system who are trying to maintain some level of independence, some level of rule of law, even under enormous political pressure. But for how long? That's the question. Because if Trump can get away with weaponizing the DOJ, with using federal prosecutors and grand juries as political weapons, then what's to stop him from going further? What's to stop any future president from doing the same thing? This Davis situation is a canary in the coal mine. It's a warning sign that things are breaking down, that the norms and guardrails that are supposed to keep the Justice Department independent are crumbling. And once they're gone, they're really hard to get back. Let me give you some context here, because I think it's important to understand how we got to this point. When Trump left office in 2021, there were multiple ongoing investigations into him. The Mar-a-Lago documents case, the January 6th case, various state-level investigations. And Trump spent years claiming these were all witch hunts, political prosecutions, that he was the victim of a two-tier justice system. And you know what? A lot of people believed him. His supporters absolutely believed that the deep state was out to get him, that the DOJ had been weaponized against him. And when he won in 2024 and came back into office, there was this expectation that he was going to clean house, that he was going to hold people accountable for what he saw as prosecutorial misconduct. But here's the problem. When you cross the line from holding people accountable through legitimate oversight to using the justice system as a weapon of political revenge, you become the very thing you claim to be fighting against. You become the authoritarian, the person who abuses power, the person who corrupts institutions for personal gain. And that's what we're seeing play out in real time. Trump and his allies aren't just conducting oversight or seeking accountability. They're trying to criminalize the act of investigating Trump. They're trying to turn federal prosecutors who did their jobs into criminals. They're trying to use the grand jury system, the FBI, the full weight of the federal government to punish their political enemies. And Mike Davis was right in the middle of that effort until he got caught, until the FBI found evidence that he may have gone too far, that he may have crossed legal lines in his zeal to go after Trump's opponents. And now he's trying to save himself by cooperating with the very system he's been attacking? Okay, so let's break this down into the key points you actually need to understand, because I know this is a lot of information and it can get confusing with all the legal jargon and the back and forth. Point 1, Mike Davis got raided by the FBI because investigators believe he may have tried to improperly influence a federal grand jury. That's obstruction. That's serious. And the fact that the FBI moved on someone this close to Trump tells you they have solid evidence. They don't raid a high-profile Trump ally just for fun. They do it because they have probable cause, because a judge signed off on a warrant, because they believe crimes were committed. Point 2, Davis decided to cooperate rather than fight. He's now a cooperative witness, which means he's talking to investigators in exchange for partial immunity. And when someone in his position flips, it's because he has information that investigators want. So what does he know? Who else was involved? Was there coordination with other Trump officials? With people in the White House? These are the questions that investigators are probably asking right now. Point 3. This is all happening in the context of broader concerns about Trump weaponizing the Justice Department. You've got House Democrats investigating that $230 million payment to Trump. You've got Jack Smith asking to testify about political interference in his investigations. You've got reports of Trump appointees throughout the DOJ pursuing cases against perceived enemies. It's a pattern, and the Davis situation fits right into that pattern. Point 4. The timing matters. We're heading into 2026 midterms. Trump's approval ratings have been unstable. There's growing frustration even among some Republicans about the chaos and the constant scandals. And now you have a story about one of Trump's most loyal allies flipping and cooperating with investigators. That's the kind of thing that can shift narratives, that can give Democrats ammunition, that can make moderate voters question whether Trump should continue to have power. So why does all this matter? Why should you care about some lawyer you've probably never heard of getting raided and deciding to cooperate? Because it's about more than just Mike Davis. It's about whether we have a justice system that operates independently or whether it's just another tool for whoever is in power. It's about whether there are still limits on what a president can do or whether we've crossed into territory where the president can use federal law enforcement to punish enemies and protect friends. And look, I know there are people watching this who love Trump, who think he's been unfairly targeted, who believe the investigations into him were political witch hunts, and I get it. You can believe that and still think it's wrong for Trump to turn around and do the exact same thing to his opponents. You can think the Russia investigation was bogus and still think it's wrong to use grand juries as political weapons. These things aren't mutually exclusive. The problem is, once you normalize this kind of behavior, once you say it's okay for the president to weaponize the Justice Department because the other side did it first, you create a race to the bottom. Democrats do it, Republicans do it back. Democrats escalate, Republicans escalate, and before you know it, the justice system isn't about justice anymore. It's just about power. That's what's at stake here. That's why the Mike Davis story matters even though most people have never heard of him. Because what happened to him, the raid, the evidence they found, his decision to cooperate, it's a window into how the Trump administration is operating behind the scenes. It's evidence that there are people trying to manipulate the legal system for political gain. And it's a warning that those efforts may have crossed legal lines. Now what happens next? Well, Davis is cooperating, which means there's probably going to be more shoes to drop. If he's giving investigators information about other people, about coordination with DOJ officials, about efforts to influence legal proceedings, then we could see more indictments, more raids, more flips. This could get bigger before it's over. There's also the question of what happens with Jack Smith's request to testify. If he actually does appear before Congress, if he gives public testimony about political interference in his investigations, that's going to be huge. That's going to dominate news cycles. That's going to give Democrats a massive platform right as the midterm campaigns are heating up. And then there's the broader political fallout. Trump's whole pitch has been that he's the victim, that everyone is out to get him, that he's fighting against the deep state and the swamp and all these corrupt forces. But when one of his own allies gets raided for potentially obstructing justice, when that ally decides to flip rather than stay loyal, it undercuts that narrative. It makes it look like Trump's circle isn't full of noble warriors fighting corruption, but rather people willing to break the law and then save themselves when they get caught. That's politically damaging, especially with moderate voters, with independents, with people who are exhausted by the constant drama and just want things to function normally again. Every story like this, every scandal, every indication that Trump's administration is chaotic and potentially criminal, it chips away at his support. But here's the thing, Trump's base isn't going anywhere. The people who love him, who believe in him, who see him as fighting for them, they're not going to abandon him because Mike Davis got raided. If anything, they'll probably see it as more proof that the deep state is still trying to take Trump down, that there are still corrupt forces in the FBI and DOJ working against him. So we end up in this weird paradox where the same story can be seen in completely opposite ways depending on your perspective. Trump supporters see it as persecution. Trump critics see it as accountability. And the gap between those two views just keeps getting wider. The question is, does any of it actually matter? Do scandals and investigations and legal troubles actually impact Trump politically anymore? Or have we reached the point where his supporters don't care, where they'll back him no matter what, and everyone else has already made up their minds? I think it still matters. Maybe not as much as it used to, but it matters because the people in the middle, The people who aren't fully committed one way or the other, they're paying attention. And every story like this, every crack in Trump's armor, every sign that his administration is operating outside the bounds of normal democratic governance, it adds up. We're watching the Trump presidency in real time. And stories like the Mike Davis raid and cooperation, they're going to be in the history books. People are going to look back at this period and ask, how did we let it get this bad? How did we allow the justice system to become so politicized? How did we lose the norms and guardrails that kept American democracy stable for so long? Those are the questions future generations are going to ask. And the answer is, it happened slowly, bit by bit, scandal by scandal, norm violation by norm violation, until one day we woke up and realized the system we thought was unbreakable was actually more fragile than we ever imagined. But let me give you another angle on this, because I think it's worth considering. There are people who would argue that Trump is simply fighting fire with fire, that the DOJ under Biden was politicized, that the Mar-a-Lago raid was unprecedented, that the prosecutions of Trump were selective and motivated by politics, and therefore Trump is justified in using the same tactics against his opponents. And you know what? There's a conversation to be had about whether the Biden DOJ handled things appropriately. There's a legitimate debate about whether some of the investigations and prosecutions of Trump cross lines. But here's the key difference. Even if you believe those investigations were politically motivated, the response shouldn't be to abandon all pretense of justice and turn the DOJ into a pure weapon of political revenge. Because once you go down that road, there's no coming back. Once both parties accept that the Justice Department is just a tool to punish opponents and protect allies, then we don't have a justice system anymore. We have a system where whoever holds power uses that power to crush their enemies. And that's not a democracy, that's authoritarianism with democratic window dressing. So when Mike Davis got raided, when he decided to flip, when evidence emerged that he may have tried to improperly influence a grand jury, that's not just about one guy's legal troubles. That's about a broader pattern of the Trump administration potentially crossing legal and ethical lines in its quest for political revenge. And the fact that Davis is cooperating suggests that investigators have more than just his actions in their sights. They're probably looking at a network of people, a coordinated effort, possibly involving high-level Trump appointees or even White House officials, because you don't give someone partial immunity unless they can help you build a bigger case. That's what makes this story so significant. It's not the end point, it's the beginning. Davis flipping could be the thread that, when pulled, unravels a much larger tapestry of misconduct and abuse of power. Or it could fizzle out, turn into nothing, be dismissed as another overblown scandal in a presidency full of them. We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. And in the meantime, we're going to keep watching, keep analyzing, keep trying to make sense of this absolute circus that is American politics in 2025. One last thing I want to mention, and this is important, is the human element of all this. Mike Davis is a real person. He has a family, a career, a reputation, and now he's in a position where he had to choose between loyalty to Trump and his own freedom. That's not an easy choice. And regardless of what you think about his politics or his actions, there's something deeply troubling about a system that puts people in that position. Because loyalty shouldn't mean being willing to go to prison for someone else's agenda. Loyalty shouldn't mean sacrificing your freedom to protect powerful people from accountability. Real loyalty, healthy loyalty, doesn't ask you to break the law or destroy your life. And yet, that's exactly what Trump's orbit has demanded from people over and over again. Be loyal, don't cooperate, don't flip, take the heat. And if you do flip, you're a rat, a traitor, weak. That's cult behavior. That's not how normal political movements operate. And it's one of the most disturbing aspects of Trump's hold on the Republican Party and conservative movement. The expectation of absolute, unquestioning loyalty, even at the cost of your freedom or your integrity. Mike Davis found out where that loyalty gets you. It gets you raided by the FBI with evidence of potential crimes. And when faced with that reality, he made the rational choice. He chose himself over Trump. And honestly, good for him. More people should make that choice. Anyway, that's the story. Mike Davis got raided, he's cooperating, and it's a window into the chaos and potential criminality of the Trump administration's efforts to weaponize the Justice Department. This is far from over. More revelations are coming. More people might flip. And the 2026 midterms are going to be absolutely wild if this story continues to develop the way it seems to be heading. Stay tuned, keep watching. And remember, in this political environment, nothing is ever quite what it seems at first glance. Dig deeper, ask questions, and don't let anyone on either side tell you that their abuse of power is justified because the other side did it first.